What crazy story do you need to tell? Story 1. Years ago I was hitchhiking north of Richmond, Virginia when a car with two dudes picked me up. We got to chatting, and it turns out they were headed to their friend's place to shoot guns and asked me if I wanted to join. I asked if his friend would be okay with a random homeless-esque fellow shooting his guns, and he said hell, just pretend to be my cousin from Seattle. So instead of sitting on the highway in 100-degree weather, I spent an afternoon eating hamburgers, shooting guns, and blowing shit up with bags of tannerite on some random duty employee's woodland property. Don't remember your name, dude, but you were the man. Thanks for a great memory. Story 2. I work in a prison as a nurse. Frequently, our inmates insert beads, usually carved from dominoes, under the skin of their penis/shaft. It's called beading, and it happens a lot. Pretty much every unit has a dick doctor, another inmate, who is particularly skilled in flaying open dicks and sticking beads inside of them. Or, some inmates say duck it and try to do it themselves. We had an inmate who cut himself shaving, yeah, okay, who had to come up to the medical department because his genitalia was bleeding. Obviously everyone's first thought is the dude was either trying to put in a bead or take one out and failed. So dude gets up to us and he's holding a towel down his pants against his crotch, and everything is soaked in blood. Underwear, towel, pants, you got it. Drenched. So I take him into an exam room and get his clothes off, and the dude goes, "It's mostly okay. I stitched it back up myself with my sewing kit." What? Yeah. He stitched his own cock up with a ducking sewing kit from commissary. Not only that, but he tied a string around his shaft as a makeshift tourniquet. I go, "Oh, hey, you might want to take that string off of your dick before it loses circulation and falls off." Anyway, we get the tourniquet off, and I take out his shitty stitches, and he starts spurting blood from his dick like an active volcano. I've never seen so much blood come from a human being before. We had to burn his cock shut with silver nitrate. It was awesome. I love dick bead stories. Story 3. When I was in high school and a few years after, my primary source of income was selling pot. One day I was just hanging out at home with a girlfriend. We went to the Circle K a few houses down and got some beer. The clerk, who I knew pretty well at this point, asked if he knew where I could get a dub sack. I said sure, and that I'd be back soon. I go home and forget about it. An hour or two later I'm like, oh shit, remember, weigh it out and go back. He had already given me the money, very important detail for later, so I waited until he had no customers. He came out and we went around the icebox, just smoking and chatting. I handed him the bag. Now, there was no one around. Empty lot except for this beat up Volvo facing the record store next door. If I had been paying better attention, I may have noticed this Volvo had completely tinted windows, which seemed odd to do on a beat up Volvo. Two men get out of the car and approach us. One tall skinny guy wearing 100% denim and another guy who looks like Dog the Bounty Hunter in a beige sweater. They approach us and ask how we are doing. Me and Clark look at each other like, you know these guys? Then all of a sudden, the flash badges and yell PD. You're under arrest. And cuff us, separate us, and search us. Beige dog goes through my texts, finds a couple dubious ones, a few crumpled up 20s, starts trying to get me to admit to doing a lot of business today, blah blah. Then they surprise me by walking me and my girlfriend back to my porch, saying they've seen me come and go quite a bit and just want to make sure you don't have a pound of heroin in there, and they'll just charge me with a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it will be jail and a felony. So here we are, on my front porch, me saying there's no way I will let them in my house and to call my lawyer over and over. At one point, my roommate walks out, says hi, gets in his car and leaves. At this point, Dog explains that if I don't let him search the house, he's going to park a few squad cars on the lawn, extract everyone from the house, and wait on a warrant, and they will charge everyone in the house with every little thing they find in any room. I now know this is not legal. Then, I was just scared. My roommate that had just left was a total nerd with a great job. Straight edge. Rarely drank and never smoked or anything at all. I was terrified of him losing his job. Unfortunately for me, I had just had an opportunity to get a quart of mushrooms at a steal of a deal. My area was super dried up on mushrooms at the time, so I asked around and basically had all my deals set before I got it. This timing was perfect because just 30 feet away on the coffee table of my bedroom was 1/4 of a pound of mushrooms, neatly weighted out into ounces and 1/8. Top that with all the pot in there, it wasn't looking pretty. So, I proposed that I'll let one of them in to search just my bedroom and be done with it. I knew once I let them in they could do whatever, but I was out of options. Beige dog agrees. Canadian Tux stays with my girlfriend, who looks terrified like WTF are you doing at me, and Dog the sweater hunter enters with me. I lead him upstairs and walk right past my door, which thank God was closed, and into the straight edge guy's room. Dog completely turns it over, takes out drawers, turns the mattress over, the whole shebang. As he does this, I quietly turn off the computer monitor with a background of my roommate and his girlfriend glaring on it. Guy finds nothing, sticks with his agreement and walks me and my shit-eating grin back downstairs. My girlfriend, probably assuming I'm going to prison for many years, is looking like she's about to die, but I'm just grinning. Guy still ducking charged me with a felony. Then they leave. Long story short, paid a lot for a great atty who was friends with the prosecutor. Since no money was seen to be exchanged, the charge was knocked down to deliverance of marijuana. The prosecutor recommended the minimum sentence. I paid an $121 fine, did 80 hours of community center at a local music venue, saw a ton of shows for free, and retired from selling. Story 4. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced, and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him. I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came, and he walked into my office straight up to me and says he had a doctor's appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing cause I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was the office next door and he left. A little while later I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out he trailed behind me and I held the door for him. He said thank you, and that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. Story 5. 3 to 4 years ago, I was living in this bigger European city, around 2 million people, for some years now. I went with a girl to a pub, and since all tables were full, we sat at the bar. There was an older guy sitting next to me, 50-ish, white hair, smoking a cigar, who kind distracted me because he reminded me of my uncle. Now mind, my uncle was living in the US for around 25 years already. He didn't look like that dude, nor did he act too similar. That bar guy just had some gestures that reminded me of him, mixed with the look of another distant relative. So, the girl I was with goes to the toilet, so I can't hold back anymore and look this dude in the eyes and tell him he reminds me of my uncle. He jokingly asks, what's his name? I tell him, and also tell him Wheel. He lives in the US and works in field_of_work, and then the guy looks stunned and tells me the names of my whole ducking family. Turns out he was the flatmate of my uncle 30 years ago for about half a year. That was definitely one of the weirdest bar stories I experienced. Story 6. So me and my brother are fraternal twins. My stepmom passed away due to breast cancer when we were around 15 years old. She was like a second mother to us and had been around since we were very young, 5 years old. Now fast forward to our junior year of college. I attended a school in upstate New York while he attended a university in the state of Florida. One night I woke up in sweat with tears coming down my eyes. I had the most vivid dream. I was in a house and my stepmother was there. I knew she had passed in this dream, which was a first for me. She hugged me, told me how handsome I had become, and that she loved me. I woke up drenched in sweat thinking WTF was that. I didn't say anything to anybody and went to class. As I'm walking back to my apartment after class, I get a call from my brother. His first words were, I know this is going to sound weird, but I had the most vivid dream about Maggie last night. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as he went on to describe the same dream I had just experienced the night prior. We've never had a twin moment like this, and I don't really know what to make of it, but it's always been a story that I wanted to tell. Story 7. Was served lunch sometime during a flight. While eating, noticed that the woman next to me is slowing down in her movements, slower cutting, slower chewing, etc. Suddenly she stops completely in her movements, fork and knife in hands, half cut food on her plate, face bowed forward above her plate and nothing else. Touched her on the shoulder, pushed a little bit, asked her if everything was okay, no reaction. Couldn't really tell if she was still alive. Was it the air conditioning or her breath? No idea. Didn't want to panic and frighten everyone else. You know. Dead person. Made eye contact with a stewardess, point towards next to me. Couple minutes later, 5 stewardesses including co-pilot form a barrier around our seats, and like in a movie tried to get a reaction don't you die on me. Woman wakes up, looks up and says just this one sentence, I took really strong sleeping pills, and goes back to sleep in the same Tyrannosaurus posture. As if this has happened before, and she had anticipated this conversation, as if she knew that her mind would only be awakened long enough for one sentence. So for the entire remaining 6 to 7 hour flight, there is this lady next to me, mimicking a Tyrannosaurus, her hands still grabbing the now removed fork and knife, drooling on the table, and everyone passing by giving me this questioning look. Best flight ever. Story 8. I saved a man's life, and I never saw him again 10 years later. This is still the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. In high school, I worked as a lifeguard at a country club for a few summers to earn some money. It was a cushy gig. It was for country club members only, so a large part of the job was learning people's names and interacting with them. Mostly just saying good morning Mr. Gerety, and listening to some generic mumbling about millennials. Well, over the 4th of July weekend, there were more people at the pool than usual. Each member could sign in one guest, and there was a middle-aged man jumping off the diving boards who I hadn't seen before. He was over 6 feet, at least 230 pounds, and was doing gainers off the low dive into the pool to make big splashes to impress his country club member friends. Well, one particular jump he got a running start and slipped off the board at the very end. His momentum was already leaning backwards to do the jump and his body came off the board a few feet and his head rotated backwards and smacked right into the diving board. I can still hear that cracking sound in my mind. I'm sitting 8 feet off the ground in the lifeguard chair at the diving well watching this all go down, and I'm praying that I don't have to do anything, even though I knew shit was about to go down. I didn't see any blood, which was a good sign. But as I watched his body sink down I counted 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. No movement. Duck. I blew 3 short tweets on the whistle, the cadence to signal to the other guards that I would need the neck board, and jumped in with my boy making as little of an impact as possible in the water. My lifeguard training took over as I dove down 8 to 9 feet to grab this dude. He was out, just making no movement whatsoever. Like I said, he was a big dude, but he wasn't as heavy in the water as I grabbed him and kicked us both up to the surface. I hoisted him onto the buoy and swam over to the edge, where by now the other guards had stuck the board down into the water. I lined up his limp body with the board as we all worked together to strap him into the board. The other guards pivoted the boards out of the water while I climbed out. I took a half-second look around to a half-dozen shocked faces, and it became clear to me that this was my show. Great. Still obeying my adrenaline-fueled rote memory of my training, I shouted for someone to call an ambulance as I made a decision. See, I thought he probably had a neck injury. The board he was strapped into is designed to not move his head, so he doesn't further injure his neck or back. But he wasn't visibly breathing, so I had to save his life at whatever cost it took. Or at least that's what my 16-year-old brain decided. So I started chest compressions. What they don't tell you about chest compressions is that you are breaking shit. You can feel bones and cartilage cracking under your palms. It feels horrible. I still haven't been able to shake that feeling. 1 round of 30, and then I did 2 breaths into his mouth. His head was already titled back a bit from being in the board, so I didn't have to move his neck. After 2 breaths, I went back to chest compressions, and after 5 or 6 a little water leaked out of his mouth. He coughed a few times, and the other guards picked up the board and whisked him away so fast I didn't even know what happened. I rolled over onto the concrete, a tinnitus like ringing in my head, my heart racing, just sitting there taking it in. I went into some trance as my teenage body struggled to deal with what just happened. Start to finish it probably only took about 6 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime of stress and nausea had built up in my body. I was walked over to the guard shack, dried off, and walked up to the country club's nicer member buildings. The manager, who was a friend's dad and had gotten me the job, sat down with me as we talked about what happened. I gave him the basic details, signed some documents, and was sent home for the day. Like I said, I was in some kind of trance and was just operating on autopilot. I'm not sure how much sense I was making at the time, and it took me several hours to process what just happened. I came back for my shift a few days later, and I was told by another lifeguard that the guy was okay. I was thanked profusely by the member who brought him as a guest, but I never saw that guy again. This was still the craziest thing that has ever happened. I'm glad my instincts took over, and I remembered my training. I might not have done everything exactly right, but I tried my best, and at the end of the day he lived through it. I hope that guy's doing okay. Story 9. I'm from a tiny province in the Philippines who decided to work in Manila right after college way back 2007. I got into a call center and met a lot of friends. Stayed in the company for about 2 years. Graveyard shift wasn't for me. Fast forward to 2013. My widowed mom in the province met through a mutual friend, a French guy, and they both got interested with each other. They eventually got engaged in 2014 and married soon after, 90df France, so they could move back to France. As they were planning their trip, I posted on social media about possible Filipino connections in France to help my mom transition well. A former colleague of mine in that call center in Manila many years back sent me a message. Told me that she has this Filipina friend, let's call her Rowena, who has been living in France for 20 plus years now, and that she may be able to help my mom. So, I told my mom to add Rowena on Facebook and connect with her. They did, and they got into talking. One day my mom was Skyping with her. They were talking about their husbands when my mom pulled out and showed to her a vintage photo of her husband when he was in university. An old photo of him sitting on a couch with his then best friend whom he has not seen since graduating. Career opportunities abroad and no cell phones during that time led to them growing apart. As soon as Rowena saw the photo, she gasped. "That's my husband beside your husband," she said. She then hurriedly went to her office and took out the exact same photo which her husband has kept through the years as well. After a few shocks and tears, two long lost best friends were able to catch up after nearly 40 years. Story 10. For context, I'm a 19-year-old Scottish guy who was interrailing around Europe for a month. We were in Budapest for a few days hitting up the clubs and sparties, really enjoying ourselves. Eventually it comes time to leave, and we decide to get an early morning train to Split, around 5 AM. Anyways, we have 2 taxis booked to the train station and we stumble out still kind of half asleep and start loading our stuff into the taxis. As we are loading we see 3 young guys sprinting full speed ahead up the road shouting "ducking run." We laughed, thought they were just having drunk fun. No, they were not. As we get in the taxis this guy covered head to toe in tattoos and others blood comes to my door and asks to shake my hand. Not wanting to offend this crazy looking ducker I shake his bloodied hand and he wishes me well. Phew, got off lightly. Guy tries to do the same with our big duck off Bulgarian taxi driver. He refuses. Bulgarian taxi driver gets in taxi and starts to back out. Crazy duck is not happy with this and starts to go to town on this guy's taxi with elbows, fists, knees, etc. We start to drive away thinking there's no chance he's gonna be bothered to follow a taxi going 20 miles per hour. Right? Now this duck is ducking Superman. Sprints faster than humanly possible after our taxi with this mad look in his eye. Taxi driver goes to turn a corner, thinking we'd got away from him, but as we turn there's a bin lorry blocking the entire road. Crazy duck rounds this corner like an atom out the Duck-in Hadron Collider. At this point I'm shouting half asleep Scottish at our taxi driver lock a duke indoors, which he thankfully does. Crazy duck starts battering the windows in with fists, blood smeared everywhere, knuckles burst. rips off the wing mirrors, starts smashing the windows in with them. At this point our friends in the taxi behind us are buckled in laughter as we sit in pure terror as the duck and Grim Reaper looms ready to take our souls. Both taxi drivers get out to get him to duck off, spits in both their faces and throws the wing mirror at them, then books it out of there. Maddest thing about it is as he was leaving he very nicely apologizes to one of the locals watching this in awe. Story 11. This is a long story from the early 1980s that has Kentucky justice in it. My family lived just outside of Cincinnati on the Kentucky side of the Ohio River. My father's older brother lived here as well and was a father to 4 daughters. One of his daughters at the age of 18 or so was dating a guy who was a little older than her, who convinced her to move down south with him. My uncle approved, and his daughter headed south with her boyfriend into a Kentucky holler that his extended family lived in. Time passed and my uncle hadn't heard from his daughter in a while, and he started to grow concerned. My cousin called my uncle in distress from a payphone at a grocery store, saying she was being mistreated by her boyfriend's family and being held hostage and worked like a slave. Before my uncle could learn more, the phone was cut off. At this point in the story, it's important to know my uncle was an avid hunter and gun collector. He explained to his wife and other daughters the situation. He packed up his Oldsmobile Delta 88 with his favorite guns and headed down to the holler his daughter's boyfriend was from. He was going down in hillbilly country, where there were no street names, just dirt roads and family farms. By the time he finally found their farmhouse it was night. The boyfriend's family was on the porch shooting shotguns off into the air, fully expecting to scare my uncle away. My uncle stopped his car 50 yards from the house and popped the trunk. He methodically lined up his rifles on the hood of the car facing the house, tooling up like Arnold in Commando on the beach. My uncle was an extremely large man, who was well known for having an explosive temper. Completely unfazed, he shouted up to the hillbillies, "If my daughter doesn't come down in 5 minutes, I'm going to come up there and kill every man, woman, and child I see." The boyfriend and his brothers ran back inside the house, and not even 1 minute later my cousin came running out of the house with her single suitcase. Same uncle another time was driving on a bridge that spanned some small river. The bridge was old and only had enough room for 1 car to traverse at a time. He came to a standoff with 3 hillbillies in a pickup truck who were honking and yelling at him to back up. My uncle ever stubborn refused and instead got out of his car figuring he'd show them how big he was and they'd change their tune. One of the hillbillies shouted to my uncle, "You don't scare us, there are 3 of us." And my uncle like a psychopath shouted back, "Do all 3 of you know how to swim?" To which they relented and backed up their truck to let my uncle pass. Story 12. I work in a supermarket as team leader. I'm quite social, so I like to include everyone who's new and make them feel comfortable. So there was this new guy, around 17 years old, who was very quiet. He spoke only when spoken to and no one really tried to converse with him. So I did. I was very kind to him, and at first he wasn't really approachable, but over the weeks he came loose and was kind to me as well. Yet no other co-workers did this. However, I did not give it a second thought of why not, but I knew why when he quit after 3 months. Turned out he had to this as some kind of community service. He's a criminal and my cheap ass supermarket hired him because they only had to pay him 1/2 of the normal salary. But that was not all. A year later or so, some drunk dudes in a bar started a fight with me. Was not big deal until I went home. 5 of them waited for me at the exit. I did not want my friend involved, so I just kept on walking away like they weren't there until they legit stopped me to beat my ass. And there he was, the guy from the supermarket with his gang banging friends. I never felt so cool in my life. 6 dudes around 21 to 25 years old came to my rescue because he was my friend. They treated them and asked them tell us why we shouldn't fucking kill you right now. Couldn't thank him and them enough, and after that we went separate ways again. Sometimes I still see him and we give each other a nod. Story 13. A little while back my roommate was contacted by a wealthy man in the area who wanted to pay her to be his live-in pet for an entire month. She thought that this was a cutesy way of saying that it was a sugar daddy / baby arrangement. Turns out what he actually meant was that she would be given room, board and a very healthy allowance to spend a large portion of her day dressed as a cat, walking on her hands and knees, eating out of a bowl, using a litter box, and, yes, sleeping in a little cage at night. Shrex wasn't even on the table. He was only interested in having a human cat for a month. She seriously considered the offer for a weekend, and then politely declined. Story 14. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check flight, close to the end of the program. I was doing the run up in a Cessna when I smelled something. Do you smell that? Smells like gas, I say. Instructor, 21-year-old, shrugs. Annoyed, I open the door, and there is a spreading puddle of avgas under the plane. Shit. The instructor panics, stay in the plane, I'll get help, and runs off. As soon as I got the engine off, I noped out of there and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane and instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later, I read about the same plane crashing due to fuel issues. 1 fatality. No significant repercussions for company. Story 15. I'm from Belgium and have traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger. When I was still together with my ex-girlfriend, we traveled a lot as well, but neither of us had been to the USA, so we told this to a befriended couple, and a few beers later we started planning a trip to go on together, because another mutual friend was studying in Philadelphia for a year and we might as well go visit him. First we went to New York and Philly for a few days, then took a plane to LA, rented a car, and took a road trip through Cali, Nevada and Utah. During this road trip we'd often laugh about some of the dumb shit we'd heard or seen people do in America. We had a bunch of jokes about people in smaller villages and all kind of crazy stuff they might do. We had just been to Sequoia National Park and we were looking for a place to spend the night and eat because it was getting late. Found some old farmhouse where we could stay in one of the fixed up cabins and asked the old lady who rented it to us where we could go and eat something. Mind you, this little town was called Pinehurst and had an extremely low population. She pointed us to the Pinehurst Lodge, which was basically the only restaurant slash bar slash store for miles. Went there, ate an amazing meal, and decided to grab some drinks afterwards and shoot some pool. As we were playing pool, this old giant approaches us, wearing a jeans shirt that said George W. Bush. Picture of an eagle. He had a bushy mustache, looked very tough for his age, and we thought he was going to give us trouble about using the pool table and laughing too hard. He is to this day one of the kindest people I've ever met. He asked if we were having fun and if he could join us. He bought us moonshine, which we obviously thought was hilarious, and we bought him a few beers as well. Had a blast the entire evening. While we were playing and drinking, the phone behind the counter kept ringing, but none of us was paying attention to it. By 23h30, all of a sudden, a woman comes barging in with a gun in her hand, looks at us and stomps over. I felt myself getting nervous and getting ready to react if I had to. She stops behind our new friend, grabs an empty beer bottle and smashes it on his head. We were all perplexed with what happened. She proceeded to shout insults at the man and started hitting him. He calmly tells her to relax, turns towards us, shook our hands, told us that if we ever came back, to be sure to let him know so we could hang out again, and then went outside with the woman. As we stood there, still trying to understand what just happened, the woman at the bar just shouts at us, that's his wife. He's a bit of a social butterfly, and she had already called 10 times to ask when he'd come home. We thought it was pretty cool and all, so we told her, oh, okay. We are just going to leave as well then, it's getting quite late. Oh, no my dearies, it's best you stay a little while longer. The shouting you hear outside is still them arguing, and I can tell she's quite pissed at you guys, because she blames you that he hadn't come home yet. And I have to say it wouldn't be the first time she shot at someone for keeping him too long at the bar, so best you stay a little bit until they leave. So we stay about 30 more minutes, all the while they keep shouting outside. Then we hear a car start and see a white truck speed off. Within seconds we see a second truck speed after the first one. This was in the mountains, with very narrow and bendy roads. Both cars just leaving at an insane speed. We hear the bartender say, she drives our children to school with the bus, you know. This would never happen at home. 100% would go back to Pinewood Lodge in a few years. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more videos.